Okay. Hi, welcome everyone. So I'm Susan Walsh, a nurse at the West Hartford Bloomfield Health District, and we're here together to talk today about lead poisoning prevention and immunization updates. So this is an hour presentation, and there's a lot of material to cover. So you might think, why are we talking about these topics now in October? It's because October is Children's Health Month. And why lead? Because this is National Lead Poisoning Prevention Week. So there's a lot of education about lead happening right now. So our plan for tonight is to talk mostly about lead. It's about 45 minutes of lead, and then we'll get about 5 minutes of immunization topics, and then some time for question and answer. You can always call the health district if you have follow-up questions or want more information. My contact number I've got on my business card that I've passed around here. So lead poisoning is 100% preventable. Let's keep that in our minds as we move forward with this presentation. Most of the information that I have included in these slides is from the Connecticut State Department of Public Health's Lead Poisoning Prevention and Control Program, excellent website, as well as the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's Childhood Lead Poisoning Prevention Program. Great sources of information for you. All right, let's first talk about lead, what the dangers of lead. Lead impacts your whole body. Lead impacts brain development, IQ, neurologic issues, affects your hormones, stomach, gastrointestinal sorts of symptoms, reproductive symptoms, sperm count, heart, anemia. It can cause kidney inflammation, and it can stunt bone growth as well as get stored in bones. And lead stays in your body for a long time. So lead, when it gets into your blood, we're going to talk about half-life. So half-life is the amount of time it takes for half of the amount of lead to leave your body. So lead that's stored in the blood takes about 30 days for half of it to be removed. In soft tissues in your organs, the half-life is 40 days. And in mineralized tissues, bones and teeth, we're talking 10 to 30 years. So we're talking about lead poisoning in the context of children, I guess officially here. And we think of lead poisoning particularly in children because growing bodies absorb more lead. But this is a lifelong problem. If you have a lot of lead exposure, that lead is physically with you for a long amount of time. So all of that suggests that lead is a public health concern. We have some Connecticut general statutes that regulate when a local health district gets notified of a child's blood lead level. And these statutes also influence hazard regulations for dust, paint, soil, water, what we consider lead contamination. So I'm going to read this slide to you because I feel like it's worded really well for why lead is a public health concern. About 3.3 million American households with children under 6 years old have lead exposure hazards from lead in deteriorated paint, dust, soil, including 2.1 million low-income households. Even very low levels of lead in children's blood are linked to adverse effects on intellect, concentration, and academic achievement. While the United States has made substantial progress reducing lead exposure for more than 40 years, significant disparities remain along racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic lines. For example, black children and children from low-income households have persistently been found to have higher blood lead levels than non-Hispanic white children and children from higher income households. Right? Case made. This is a public health concern. So we have this regulation that people need to get tested for lead. So what are those things? All children between the ages of 9 months and 35 months must be tested annually for lead in blood. All children between the ages of 3 years and 6 years must be tested if they haven't previously been tested, so they've moved into our area or for whatever reason. We are required, to make sure that people get tested. All children under the age of 6 years must be tested if clinically indicated, meaning they have symptoms or that we have some known exposures. Medical providers must provide education and guidance to parents regarding lead poisoning prevention before testing. And medical providers must conduct medical risk assessment at least annually for children between the ages of 3 years and 6 years. So what does that risk assessment include? Well, this is it. So the reasons for these questions are going to be clear to you by the end of this presentation. So a medical provider is going to be assessing whether the child visits or lives in buildings that were built before 1978. 1978 is kind of an important year in lead regulation. Medical providers will also be asking, does the child have a family member or a friend that's being treated for lead poisoning? So if someone that the child is with some frequency has lead poisoning, probably that child has similar exposures. Another question is, does the child encounter an adult whose hobby or job exposes them to lead? There are a lot of jobs and hobbies that put people at risk for exposure to lead. So we're assessing for that. And then the last is, has the child been exposed to certain imported products? And I've got a handout for each of you with some examples of some imported products that that's known to have high levels of lead. All right, so once we get a child tested, what does that mean? So if the blood lead level, either assessed by vein or by capillary, is a 3.5 or higher, the local health district gets notified. There is no safe level of lead, but the intervention level is currently 3.5. So blood lead levels range can go much, much higher. At a level of 45, then we chelate them. That means to give them a medication to get that lead out of their body. Otherwise, we do other kinds of supportive interventions that promote removal of lead and prevent additional exposure to lead. So let's talk a little bit more about that testing. So venous blood lead level testing is the most useful for screening and diagnostic assessments of lead. So this is venous blood testing right up here. It's what you go to Quest or LabCorp, standard blood test. So a venous blood lead level test is a point in time. This is what your lead level is in your blood at that moment in time. The zinc protoporphyrin test is another kind of blood test that's used to detect the average exposure to lead over maybe the last 3, maybe 4 months. It's not sufficiently sensitive to use at levels below about 20. And because of some supply chain things, we can only get an accurate level on a ZPP of about 120. People who have long exposure, chronic exposure to lead may actually have a ZPP, a true ZPP in the thousands. So ZPP can be a useful test in assessing lead exposures. The capillary blood test, which is something that's sometimes done in doctor's offices, use an alcohol swab on the finger, do a lead test. That is, there are lots of ways for lead contamination. That is maybe a helpful screening tool, but if you end up with a capillary lead level of 3.5 or higher, then you need a confirmatory venous lead test. So individuals who have high or chronic past exposure to lead, we've talked about that lead getting stored in bones, teeth, other parts of the body. So a blood test may not give an accurate description of the total burden of lead that body is holding, because that lead can be stored in the body. So let's talk about lead absorption. So how much lead you absorb when you're exposed to, when you're exposed to lead is influenced by the size of the lead, your age, your nutrition, whether you have a full stomach or an empty stomach. Let's talk about that a little bit. So you can inhale lead. So you can inhale lead that's like dust. And you can inhale lead as a vapor, like so from construction. There are a lot of ways that lead can be coming to you as a vapor. In household situations, it's more likely that's going to be like lead dust that's loose and you inhale it. The smaller the lead particle is that you're breathing it in, the deeper it can go into your lungs. And you can have 100% absorption of that lead as it gets deep into your lungs. You can also ingest lead. So of course a child might inadvertently eat a paint chip or chew on a windowsill or something and get lead exposure that way. But they can also have lead dust in their environment, drop a pacifier, have a toy, not wash their hands, play in the dirt, get their hands in their mouth, and that would be kind of an ingestion form of lead exposure. So children who have empty bellies, meaning they haven't eaten a meal recently, can absorb up to 100% of that lead that's ingested. But if they have a full belly at the time and a diet that's rich in iron, calcium, zinc, and vitamin C, they absorb less of that lead. So the level of lead that they might absorb in that case might be 50%. Adults typically absorb about 20% of ingested lead after a meal and up to 60 to 80% on an empty stomach. So as after your body does process lead, then you do excrete it when you go to the bathroom. But again, lead can be stored in your body. So key things to know about lead. We've talked about scary things already, but lead is preventable. Lead poisoning is completely preventable. There is no safe level of lead. Many of us have been around long enough to have been told that there are safe levels of lead. When I had kids, the level of lead was 10. You know, that was sort of the number where it was the threshold of concern was a 10. Now we've got that level of 3.5. When I was a kid, that level was 40. So there's been a lot of change, improvements in recognition of lead poisoning, and a lot of changes in regulations that is preventing exposures to lead, but we still have a long way to go. So once lead gets into the child's body, it can hurt the brain, kidneys, nervous system. Lead poisoning causes slow growth, slow development, difficulty learning, behavioral problems. Young children absorb lead more easily than adults, and how you clean your home and how you clean yourself impacts your exposure to lead. So what is lead? Lead's a naturally occurring, very soft, dense, moldable metal. It's stable in the environment. It's resistant to corrosion. It's a poor conductor of electricity. It's an effective shield against radiation, and it's toxic. These are just properties of lead. Because of these properties, lead's been used for many purposes for thousands of years. The anti-corrosive properties of lead has caused it to be used in plumbing and gasoline, paint, batteries, commercial products, insecticides, fungicides. It's toxic, so it makes a very effective insecticide, used in apple orchards a lot, historically. So jobs, I won't read through this slide, but jobs that people may encounter a lot of lead. So automotive industry, construction industry, working with smelters, working with stained glass, ceramics, recycling materials, welding, cutting, working with ballistics or fishing, lots of potential exposures to lead. And hobbies too. So for casting, soldering, glazes, there can be lead in the pigments in ceramics as well as in the glazes of ceramics. Home renovations, repair, remodeling, painting, many of us encounter lead that way. Firearms, the casings of bullets can have lead. You can still buy lead weights for fishing. Home distilled liquids can have lead, and storing like alcohol in leaded glass is another way that people get exposures to lead. So if you have exposures to lead in your jobs or hobbies, you need to be thinking about how to prevent other people from having those exposures too. So if you, say, work at an automotive business and you drive yourself back and forth to work. So you've been at work, you've had those contaminants on your clothes, and you sit down in your driver's seat of your car. You've got lead dirt on your hands. You've got it on your clothing. You've contaminated your driver's seat of your car. If you take off your jacket and toss it on the passenger side seat, you've now contaminated that seat too. So if another passenger comes and sits down there in the future, they have lead exposure that way. So just be really thoughtful about preventing other people from having exposures to lead, and for yourself too. So wash your hands, shower, change your clothes and shoes, wash your clothes separately. Really work to prevent moving that lead. So now we're going to talk about lead in drinking water, then we're going to talk about lead in paint, and then we'll talk about lead in soil. And much of these are about regulations. So 1974, the Safe Drinking Water Act was passed by Congress. There were some subsequent amendments. These have addressed some lead hazards. 1991, a really important lead and copper rule came out that was to prevent the water from being so corrosive. Lead in water is corrosive. So corrosion causes metal to dissolve or wear away from pipes and fixtures, gets in the water, and then gets transported along. So, so with that lead and copper rule, there was a use of anti-corrosives in water in a protective way. Even if there are good regulations, things can fall through the cracks, and the Flint water crisis is an example of this. So in 2014, Flint, Michigan changed their drinking water source without implementing those anti-corrosion interventions. And that resulted in water going through pipes, leaching out a lot of lead from the pipes, and causing a lot of children to get poisoned. Homes built before 1986 are more likely to have lead in their pipes, fixtures, and solder. Lead can enter drinking water when corrosion occurs, but that is also impacted by the length of time that water is touching those pipes, as well as the temperature of the water. So good strategies are to flush your pipes if the water's been stagnant in the pipes, like overnight, or you've been away from the home for a while, and by temperature. So cold water absorbs less lead than warm water. So like if you're filling a pot of water for rice or pasta, fill that pot of water with cold water instead of hot water. A really good thing that will be very helpful to prevent lead in drinking water is President Biden's bipartisan infrastructure law includes $15 billion of funding to remove lead-containing water service pipes that connect public water supply to household plumbing. So lead in paint. 1977, the Consumer Product Safety Commission limited the lead in most paints to 0.06%. That's standard residential kind of paint. There's still significant amount of lead in paints that are used for, say, bridges, for steel and iron structures in aviation. There's still leaded paint in use. But household lead paint had some really effective regulations with this 1977 law. Now, 0.06, there's still lead in these things, but we're going to compare it to paint and lead that was up to 50%. So 1955, there was a voluntary agreement where people could were encouraged to have a paint lead content standard of 1%. And that's because, say, white household paint, was often, prior to that, 50% lead and 50% linseed oil. So very high amounts of lead. So overall, as you think about this, think about the older the house, the more likely it has lead paint, and probably also lead in plumbing and things. The older the house is, the more likely it's to have higher concentrations of lead. And the older the house, the greater likelihood of it having deteriorated lead paint, or lead paint that's defective that can contribute to lead poisoning. Even if leaded paint is covered with non-leaded paint, lead dust can still get released. So that would be by chipping, friction, impact, peeling. Home renovation is an obvious source of ways that this lead can get loosened up and available to people. But also just walking through your house with a laundry basket, bumping the door frames. You know, even if you had a non-leaded paint over that door frame, you're breaking those seals and releasing that lead paint that's underneath. Children can be exposed to lead if they chew on surfaces coated in lead-based paints, such as windowsills and door edges. They can be exposed if they eat flaking paint chips or eat or breathe in lead dust. Lead in soil. Lead-contaminated soil continues to be a hazardous source of lead exposure for young children in the United States. There was leaded gasoline until 1980. Exterior household lead paint, you think about that degrading, breaking down, gets into the soil. Industrial sources, we talked about pesticides contaminating the soil. Lots of ways that there's lead in the soil, particularly around homes that are built before 1978. So how do you prevent exposure to that? Reduce or eliminate exposure to lead in soil by taking off your shoes when you're coming in and out of your home. Use a cloth mat there that you can wash. Prevent children and pets from playing in bare soil. If you have bare soil on your property, cover it. Grow grass, put mulch over it, wood chips. Limit exposure to bare soil. And of course, if you know that you have lead in your soil, use raised beds if you're going to be doing gardening, and not and don't just plant right into it. Lead in imported products. I've given you that handout with some some things that we know have lead in them. But let's talk a little bit about how lead can get into imported products. So here in the United States, we have some good regulations around lead. Things still fall through the cracks, of course. We talked about Flint, Michigan. But there are a lot of countries that don't have these kinds of regulations. So if you're getting something from a country that doesn't have these kinds of regulations, and say they are able to have lead in their ink. So if you have a food product that's wrapped in paper that has ink on it, and there's lead in that ink, that lead can leach into the food or drink product, whatever else is, in that packaging. Lead and other heavy metals may be added or accidentally get into foods and products during grinding or coloring. Some imported food and drink cans may still contain lead and solder. We don't, in the United States, we have regulations. There can't be lead and solder in food cans, but that still can happen in other countries. We talked about pottery and ceramicware a little bit, but the pigments in ceramics can have lead, and the glazes can also. Lead's been found in imported home remedies, cosmetics, things used in religious ceremonies, things like cinder and coal. So if a person is applying these things as makeup or in a religious ceremony, and a child or the individual then touches that and then touches their mouth, that's a form of, a way to have an ingestion of lead. Another thing, metal wicks and candles, particularly imported ones, may have lead in them also. Lead in toys. Boy, this slide of anything, this slide is one of the ones that really sits with me the most. So the use of lead in plastics has not been banned. Lead is used to soften plastic and to make it more flexible so that it can go back to its original shape. It may also be used in plastic toys to stabilize molecules from heat. And when plastic is exposed to sunlight, air, or detergents, the chemical bond between the lead and plastics can break down and form a dust. And a young child may touch that plastic toy and then ingest the dust when they put their finger in their mouths. Now I think of my own kids, the little plastic toys they'd take out to the sandbox, and they'd be out there in the sun, and then maybe a month later they'd come in, and goodness, you really worry about the potential lead exposure that way. In jewelry, lead is often used in jewelry, including children's jewelry, to make the product heavier, to brighten the colors, and to stabilize and soften plastics. Jewelry labeled as made in the United States is less likely to contain lead compared to jewelry made abroad. Children shouldn't be allowed to wear jewelry that may contain lead. Obviously, they can chew on it, suck on it, get exposure that way. Imported toys, I think where this is probably clear too. Regulations are different in different countries. Toys can have lead on them. Antique toys, I mean, we probably all have like the train that you had as a kid. You want your kid to play with it, don't, right? Put it on a shelf, out of reach. Hazards are just too high. All right, so despite good regulations, things can fall through the cracks, and there are lead recalls. So items that are sold legally, and then there's a recognition that there is some lead in that product, and then there's a recall. So there's a wonderful website, Consumer Product Safety Commission, that lists recalls of all sorts of things. It's very easy to use. You search it for lead. I've included just 4 things that have lead recalls. I know the print is small, so I'll just sort of highlight some of them. So this first item here is clothing. And this has a lead recall because there's lead in that ink on that item of clothing. Definitely a hazard. This is a pin, like a pin that you'd put on your clothing. There's lead in that paint, so there's a recall on it. And these are children's cups on the bottoms that got recalled related to lead. So lead-safe work practices. If you're working on your home, you have a crack in your paint, and you're wanting to to sand things down and to paint your wall. Think about what happens when you sand. You're creating a lot of lead dust that you can then breathe in, and you can also get into your body through ingestion. So don't dry scrape and sand painted surfaces. Wet the painted surface before scraping or sanding. Don't power wash prior to painting. That loosens up all this lead paint and creates all sorts of hazards. So use personal protective equipment when working on painted surfaces. Use containment and barriers to prevent paint chips and dust from spreading from the work area. Federal law requires contractors that disturb painted surfaces in homes and child care facilities and schools built before 1978 to be certified, and they need to follow specific work practices to prevent lead contamination. Lead abatement's a higher level of intervention. So the local health district issues an order for lead abatement when there is defective leaded paint in a property that has a child under the age of 6. This is a standard of intervention that involves removing lead, containing lead, replacing lead. Also, a comprehensive inspection of a property is required if a child has an elevated blood lead level that exceeds a particular threshold, and if in that assessment, elevated levels of lead are found in the paint, dust, water, or soil, the local health district issues an order for lead abatement. So, strategies to limit lead exposure in the home. This is largely a summary slide. Place washable mats inside and outside of exterior doors to limit tracking lead into the home. Wash those mats. Take off your shoes before entering the house. Keep your pets and children out of exposed dirt. Avoid dry sweeping. Again, that just brings the lead dust into the air. If you're using a vacuum, an industrial grade HEPA vacuum cleaner prevents lead from getting through the bag and getting back in the air. In just residential grade vacuum cleaners don't meet that standard. So you may be vacuuming up a bunch of junk, but that lead dust can still get back out of the vacuum cleaner and back into the environment. There's a cleaning strategy called the 3-bucket system that we can talk about at the end of this presentation if there's time. But for the most part, just think about wet cleaning. So high detergent, doesn't matter what kind of detergent, but cleaning and rinsing well, frequently and thoroughly. And washing things many times initially is good. Always wash your hands frequently. If you do have some areas of defective paint in your home, so that there's some area on the wall that has defective paint or on a windowsill, block that area. So if you can move a piece of furniture in front of it until it can get remedied, great. If you need use some tape or contact paper to cover that area until it can get remedied, do that. But really prevent access to defective paint. So lead can harm young children's growth and development. Don't delay getting blood testing. If your medical provider hasn't talked with you about getting your kids tested for lead, talk to them about it. And you can contact us at the Health District and we will do some education with your medical providers too. So now we're going to shift into immunizations, and this is the section that we'll talk about for maybe 5 minutes or so, and then we'll move into questions. So the CDC annually updates their recommended immunization schedules. You can see those online. They're very accessible. You can contact your primary care provider or us at the Health District to learn what vaccines you might need to have. You can also access your own vaccine record through CTWiz. You can log on, get your own secure password, and get access to your vaccination records. We at the Health District do offer vaccines. That's another flyer that we have out there. Call us at the Health District. We schedule appointments to offer standard vaccines. We do offer community flu clinics. We've got a couple tomorrow. We also offer them in the office, but the community flu clinics don't require an appointment. And COVID vaccines. You might remember last year we were offering combined flu and COVID vaccine clinics. We're not doing that this year because there have been some changes in the funding of the COVID vaccine. So we have to run a prior authorization before using it. COVID vaccines, the goal now is to move to a seasonal COVID vaccine. You'd get it on sort of the same schedule as a flu vaccine. There's a new one now. If you haven't already had it, we can talk about it. It is recommended for everyone. If you've had COVID within the last 3 months, you probably are still carrying some immunity, and you might have a stronger, more robust immune response if you wait about 3 months. But consider your own individual situations. If you're getting close to a holiday or you're about to go on a cruise, you might choose to get that vaccine sooner than the 3-month window of time. We at the Health District are offering the Moderna vaccine for people 5 years and older. We do have limited appointments. You can call our office. We'll schedule you. We would love to vaccinate you. But if you either want a different vaccine or that you want to get vaccinated at a schedule that we can't accommodate, there's a wonderful website, vaccines.gov. I've included some screenshots about how it works. It's very user-friendly. So you go to vaccines.gov. You can choose either to search for COVID vaccines or flu vaccines. You put in your zip code and then click off the type of vaccine that you're looking for. You can choose the type of COVID vaccine, for instance, and then search. And you end up with a map of all the places that provide that vaccine. You get the contact number too. You can then filter from this page for things like availability and this bridge program. So at this point, if you are uninsured or underinsured, you can get the COVID vaccine free of charge through VIG Access program participants, and you can search for that. There's also a wonderful dashboard through CDC, the Connecticut Department of Public Health. It's their viral respiratory disease dashboard. And this is one of the screens. You can search. This is a very user-friendly site. I encourage you to take a look at it. This screen of it just gives you the total numbers of flu, COVID, and RSV. Another thing you can search for is this sort of thing: weekly emergency department visits by type. So we've got total emergency room visits related to respiratory illness, and then it's subdivided out by COVID, flu, and RSV. Really useful information. So that kind of gets us through our topics. I know we buzzed through a lot. I guess we got through it a little faster than I was expecting. So we can go back and talk in more detail about things. I was thinking I was really crunched for time, so I flew a little bit. Are there questions from you all at this point? Yeah.
What's the 3-bucket cleaning system?
The 3-bucket cleaning system. Thank you. I just love this. So if you know that you have, if we at the Health District have already talked with you and identified that there's lead, or you know that you're living in a property that was built before 1978 and you've got lead, you work on the assumption that you have lead exposure in that home. So it's really valuable to do a deep cleaning to all that lead, and then you can do maintenance cleaning. So think about your kitchen. Think about whatever room you have, maybe the most sort of nose floor. Get 3 buckets of really hot water, put a whole lot of detergent in one of those buckets, get yourself some gloves and a bunch of rags, and then start in one detergent bucket, clean a 4-foot space, rinse it from bucket number 2, rinse it again from bucket number 3, and then move forward. Change your water as you need. That brings down lead, that level of cleaning all that frequently. Of course, if you've got dogs who are coming in and out of the house, you're going to be needing to do it a lot more, but you can do maintenance cleaning with that question. Other questions?
What happens if someone tests positive for lead?
So what happens if someone tests positive? A pediatrician has sent this child for lead testing, and they go to Quest or LabCorp. They get a blood lead level, then see that. It comes into a queue, and I see this level. So then hopefully the pediatrician or the primary care provider is also contacting that family to alert the district. We'll contact that family and start first a verbal assessment. Do some education. Try to get some sense of what that lead exposure may be. And we will provide certain documentation that you all have here also. Information about lead, about potential exposures to lead, cleaning strategies, and we kind of make a plan. If there are some obvious things that we can identify as potential lead exposures just over the telephone, then we're certainly going to encourage those, change whatever can be changed. But then we do follow-up testing, and I'm going to go back to a slide where we talk more about that follow-up testing. So if the child had a lead level of 7, so first if that was a 7 by capillary, my first thing I'm going to say is I'm going to give you some education about lead, but I'm going to say we need to get confirmatory testing done, venous confirmatory testing. There are lots of reasons why the capillary tested and the venous, but if they were a 7 on a venous blood level, then they would need to make sure we got them retested within 3 months. That matches the lead level. So the higher the lead level, the more frequent we're testing them. If there's a blood level of a 45, though, we're getting that child to the emergency room immediately and stay involved until that threshold level they're below that threshold level. The threshold shifted in December of last year, at the end of the year, from a 5 to a 3.5. Maybe still tells you like, oh, your level is below 5, you don't need to do extra testing. It's a recent change. We're still having to do additional education to make sure everyone understands that 3.5 is now that level, that threshold level at which we'll stay involved and help working with people to get that level down. Now, if the level's high, there are certain thresholds, and these thresholds are changing. But at this point, if your child has a level of 10 or above, we as a health district are going to be coming in to do an epidemiologic investigation. So some of that's going to be done over the phone, say with me. We're really doing a deeper exploration of what those exposures may be, and then going to the home and meeting with the family and trying to understand what's going on. A comprehensive lead inspection is when our sanitarians will come in and test the lead in the paint and the soil and the water. And that's where we might hit the lead abatement statutes, where we would need to have the house abated. And that means, as we talked earlier, either removing lead, containing that lead, and there are some grants, some ways that can be done in an affordable way. There's a program, Healthy Homes, through CCMC, that has a lot of funding to support lead abatement. The town of West Hartford does too, housing rehab So there's some ways to help make this affordable. Did I answer that question? Great.
I have a bunch of questions.
Sure.
I'll just piggyback. Is there funding available for families that are displaced? Do those to either owners of apartment buildings or whatnot? What happens?
So if it's a rental, so if you are renting a property and your child has a blood lead level, that do that abatement.
Okay.
If you were the homeowner, you can apply for like this Healthy Homes funding, and if you qualify, so largely it's that sort of thing. If you have that ability to relocate to a family member or a friend, that's great. We take advantage of everything. But their childhood lead exposure, these growing bodies absorb lead more readily than an adult body. Adults can still get lead poisoned. We already talked about the burden of lead that a body may hold. Definitely get other people tested. So if you've got multiple children in the family, one child's testing positive for lead, part of what we're doing is talking with that pediatrician, making sure that the other children in the home get tested. Encourage family members to get tested. If there are friends that come over to the house, get everyone tested. It doesn't, that is part of the education piece.
Right.
So.
It sounds like there's a big education piece on different levels that is happening and needs to happen. And
yes.
One of the, I was wondering about the correlation between lead being brought into the home
Mm-hmm.
and rather than lead being found in the paint, for example, or the dust or the soil. And I was wondering if it's tracked that way, and if your epidemiologists go out or to track down the source.
Like what's the source of
If
lead?
it's not found in the soil or the paint, would the natural next step be to find out if it's being tracked in by someone who's in a workplace, perhaps, that the lead is coming into the home?
Yes, that's part of what we do, absolutely. So if you have if you have a 3.5, if your child has a 3.5, a lot of the work we're going to be doing is by telephone. Trying to understand, you're going to be representing what the exposures are. We're going to be talking about the age of your house, what the paint looks like. As the level goes up, the physical interventions are a little different. I and a sanitarian will come to your house and actually investigate that and look around. We are required at certain childhood levels of lead to do a deep inspection of really testing the lead. We've got a couple of ways that we're testing the lead in the paint, testing the lead in the water and soil. If those things are coming up positive, then of course we're recognizing that the home is at least one source of lead. There may be others. But the other thing that's happening concurrently is I, a nurse, or another sanitarian are asking a lot of those other kind of epidemiologic questions. Where does the child go? Do they spend time at grandma's house? What's the quality of the paint there? Are they at a friend's house? Do they go to a daycare? How are the family members employed? Do they all go fishing together and bite lead weights onto their fishing lines? We're exploring all of that and really trying to understand what those exposures are. And we're persistent. We talk with the medical providers and they're going to be doing these investigations too. And we kind of work together to try to identify what these sources are. It can take a while. As sort of an aside, I was this is National Lead Poisoning Prevention Week, and I've been on a variety of webinars, and there was one that I was on yesterday that was so interesting. It was a local health district talked about having a case that was pretty high, and they'd gone in and done investigations on the home. They had assessed the soil, the water, they've asked about employment, all sorts of things. Looked in the cabinets, looked at the kind of pottery that was around the house. They weren't seeing anything. And then, sort of months into this process, they went back to the home and there was a cooking vessel that triggered the the local health district's mind to say that's an imported thing that is made of ceramics that frequently has lead in it. So water was boiled in that item. So when they tested, so they did kind of a test. At first they tested the surface of that ceramic item, and then they boiled water in it the way that item would be used. And they found that the water boiled in that item leached a ton of lead out of that product. And so that when they compared the lead from water that had been boiled in that to tap water that was coming out of the tap, it was extremely different. So it took some time, but they did ultimately persist until they found some explanations. So we are dogged and determined.
It sounds like it. The other thing that I was wondering.
Yeah, keep going.
I don't mean to.
Listen, I thought I was going to be talking for an hour.
It is, what level of public service awareness and advertisements are geared towards people in the industries? Because, for example, we have a lot of factories, manufacturing. We have a lot of car repair places, and I'm just wondering, are the employees being educated? Is there a way to educate the employees on how to avoid bringing the contaminants into the home? Like, it's the first time I'm hearing that. That's really, of course, I guess it should be common sense, but I hadn't thought of it when you were talking about even washing the clothing separately from everyone else's. And a lot of us culturally and just hygienically, we want our shoes off. We ask people to take their shoes off. But how many times do workmen come into the house, or work people, and they don't take their shoes off, but they're traipsing in with that, and it sounds like there's a transdermal method of transmission, not only just ingestion and inhaling it, but also transdermally.
Ingestion and inhaling are the primary ones. Yeah. So it's an excellent question. So people who are in the construction industry get a lot of education on this, and there's a certification that they have to have. So that piece, I think that there's a lot of effort on. I mean, there's a lot of education. But I don't think, and I would welcome input from you all, I think you're right, that is an untapped space of people who work in industries that have high exposure to lead. I don't know if their sort of occupational health people are talking about that. So there's definitely room for us to get engaged there.
I recall a slide in the very beginning where there was a disproportionate number of children with high lead based on income. There was a disparity a correlation between lead poisoning and low income, and so there does seem to be a definite link between not only the income but type of work, perhaps, and the type of exposure that they may have.
That may be. I don't know that I would come to that conclusion, but certainly there are industries that are where there is just known exposure. Some of those are very high skilled jobs, but certainly there's when we are just trying to get our bills paid and we're working multiple jobs, there's a lot of ways where we might things might fall through the cracks. And certainly if you're going from one job to another, the idea of changing your clothes in between, there's just a whole lot to juggle in life. So I think you're absolutely right, and I think that probably in the following week I'll think about what industries we have in our West Hartford Bloomfield Health District catchment area to see if there's room for some education on that. I really appreciate that you brought that up, because I'm not sure what sort of education is happening within those organizations about exposure. It's really good.
those of us who are homeowners, and a lot of people in West Hartford have homes built prior to
Yeah.
1978, is it simply enough to encapsulate by painting, or must we completely sand and start all over again?
I'm going to answer that question, but let's hear your part of it. It sounds like you're going to piggyback.
I'm thinking that the dust will come up though, if you just try to sand it, because I remember you said before that the dust would come up.
That's right.
So I'm wondering about encapsulating it.
Right.
Oftentimes we just paint over.
Right. So you all are listening, and that brings me great joy. So you're absolutely right. If you've got, if you have paint that you know is deteriorated, you can want to sandwich it up by painting over it. That can effectively contain the paint underneath, so long as it doesn't crack and break through. So if you already have a wall that's got flaking paint on it, and you just put nice unleaded latex paint over it, it's going to come apart and break. So that wet cleaning, the wet scraping is going to be really important before you paint over it. But yes, for the most part, a homeowner can paint over lead paint and contain it fairly well. That doesn't meet the definition of encapsulation. So when a lead abatement contractor comes into your home to abate, they use a really thick paint as a liquid encapsulant. And they can use like I'm going to mispronounce the word, like a cementous encapsulant too, and they can do removal. There's a lot of work to be involved in that. So a standard homeowner, particularly if you know that your home likely has lead in it, staying up on the maintenance to make sure that surfaces are painted well, and to hire an RRP contractor to do work on your house, and to make sure that you are using lead-safe practices for the things that you are doing on your own in your house is really important. There are a lot of things you ought to just be thinking about if you are a homeowner or if you're a renter too. Think about the integrity of the paint in your house. Think about door jambs. Think about window frames. So paint deteriorates when there's friction, when there's chipping. So let's just think about painted windows. So whether or not you have central air, you probably have times that you want to open up your window. If you have a painted window and a painted window jamb, every time you're opening that window, you're creating friction. So even if you're not seeing lead chips, you've got this friction that's creating lead dust. So that's a real hazard. So always think about that. Think about, making sure you're using good cleaning strategies too. But that's really just paint that we're talking about. Soil, of course, coming in from your house, kicking your shoes off, using washable mats. Those are really good things too. Water, I think thinking about flushing your pipes, using cold water if you're going to be cooking with your water. That's good. If you've got old faucets, even if you're at the, at Lowe's, Home Depot, whatever, you're looking at products and you're seeing things that say meets the EPA level of no lead, there still may be lead in there. There is a threshold. So you want to sort of think about whether there's corrosion or how damaged things look. And on the spout of your faucet, so if you're thinking of like a bathroom sink, or let's say a bathroom sink, you've got the faucet coming out, and if you put your hand right where the water comes out of that faucet, if you touch it with your finger, you may feel a screen, a filter right there. Twist that off and rinse it out. So if there's like lead solder in the pipes that are bringing water to your home, that lead solder can break off. It can form these kind of little pebbles, and that gets stuck in that filter. And then the more that water rinses over it, that can absorb more lead. So just just think about all these different ways that lead can get in the environment and can get in your home. And it really is, it can be kind of overwhelming, all those different ways that you might have lead exposure. Did we kind of touch on your question well enough?
Yeah, this was a great presentation.
Good. So we're at 7. Were there any final questions as a group? So feel free to ask me separately, or you've got my business card, so you can call us at the Health District. We are happy to answer questions or talk more about lead at any time.
Great job.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Great.
I just want to say something. If you know families, if everybody have friends here, you have kind of a chance to talk with someone about this. This is a really concerned topic. The health district do the best they can to follow up. Susan is always educating the families when we receive the results, as she mentioned. But this is a real concern, especially for kids. So if you have the chance or a moment to just bring awareness to somebody else, especially families have young kids under 6, how they can advocate for themselves. They also are free to call us, the health department, if they have questions, but also I can definitely talk with that person too. If they need more time, if they are new in the country, they are not sure about it, please share this information. Thank you so much for the community, the West Hartford Community Interactive, who is able to put that online, and some people are watching right now. So I really appreciate that, and we can share that link so the person also could be educated about it. We really appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for coming here.
Thank you. Great.
Hi,
How are you?
How are you?
Pleasure.